Welcome to Movies Are Life. I'm your host, Nathan Chandler, and somebody call HR because we are talking about the workplace romance 2 Weeks Notice, starring Sandra Bullock and Hugh Grant. And I'm happy to welcome in an old East Texas family friend, Sarah Medin, to talk about this film, which falls at number 17 on the 50 Best Rom-Coms list. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm doing great. How are you?
So good. I mean, how long has it been since we've talked to each other?
Maybe since when this movie came out in 2002.
Yeah, I feel like I was, especially after college, I was real connected to your dad, and we did lots of things like in Longview. But then I think since I moved from Longview, I just really, I don't think I have seen your family since then.
I think it's been a while for sure.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I know you definitely love the theater world, but I didn't know. Are you a big movie fan as well?
I am a big movie fan. I have genres that I enjoy more than others. I love actually going to the movies. I love sitting with popcorn, and my personal preference is a Coke Zero. Now, if you go up north, the only option is Pepsi, which really makes me sad, but I really enjoy the movie experience. So even if it's not as great a movie, I still want to be immersed in the theater.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm kind of cheating you a little bit because I feel like a musical would have been like perfect for you to discuss, but I hope this romantic comedy will suffice.
This is one of my favorites, so it's a perfect fit.
Great. Well, that's a perfect lead in to just jump in, and we'll explore this world of career choices, personal values, and work-life balance.
Meet Lucy Kelson.
Hey, that's my coffee, you jerk!
Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. See, I thought you were needy.
She has a law degree from Harvard.
You're my brilliant chief counsel who's always honest with me.
Well, then, honestly, I think you are the most selfish human being on the planet.
Well, that's just silly. Have you met everyone on the planet?
And an eccentric billionaire boss.
Congratulations on the baby.
What baby?
2 Weeks Notice is a 2002 American romantic comedy film written and directed by Marc Lawrence and starring Hugh Grant and Sandra Bullock. Although critical response was mixed at the time, the film was successful at the box office. If you don't know about the movie, 2 Weeks Notice is about a dedicated environmental lawyer, Lucy Kelson, played by Sandra Bullock, who goes to work for billionaire George Wade as part of a deal to preserve a community center. Indecisive and weak-willed, George grows dependent on Lucy's guidance on everything from legal matters to clothing. Exasperated, Lucy gives notice and picks Harvard graduate June Carter as her replacement. As Lucy's time at the firm nears an end, she grows jealous of June and has second thoughts about leaving George. From what I could find, I don't think it was nominated for a Golden Globe but I feel like this is a movie that, especially I think probably people around our age or our generation, this was definitely a movie that they saw, but I can't quite recall when I saw it. How about you?
I do remember watching it, and it was very interesting to me as I was looking up different facts about the film. I did not realize that same year, the romantic comedies that came out, such as Sweet Home Alabama, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, Made in Manhattan, some others that were really big movies that I still love and watch to this day. I did not realize all of those came out the same year that this movie came out.
Yeah. Early 2000s were very, very heavy on these, and probably, definitely at that time could draw people into the movie theater. I think now, if it's just a straight up romantic comedy, people aren't really there. It's just not. It doesn't find a really big audience unless the only thing I can think of is maybe it was like starring Zendaya and Tom Holland now or something. Maybe that would draw in a different generation, but a lot of the rom-coms now just seem to go to the streaming services.
Absolutely. And it's sad to me because I love a great rom-com for sure.
Yeah. So what about this movie do you really enjoy about it?
I think it's the first time I really saw Hugh Grant with the clever banter. If I think back to Notting Hill, that was much more, it was a beautiful rom-com, but it was much more cerebral, I think, and it did not have that quick banter. And he and Sandra Bullock have that perfectly. She's known for that, and she's done it in so many movies, but I love Hugh Grant. I think he's absolutely adorable and would watch pretty much anything that he is in. but the way their chemistry in this movie was absolutely perfect to me. And I think it reminds me a lot of my husband's and my banter back and forth. He's really smart, and I had to up my game when we got married. And so being able to have that kind of banter where you could go back and forth, very quick-witted, just funny. There's so many funny one-liners in this movie. I think that's why I love it so much, is because you have to be listening. You can't just tune out. Otherwise, you miss half of what's going on and those funny one-liners.
Yeah. I haven't done the official tally, but so far we've made it about halfway through this list. It's probably very fair to say that Hugh Grant has what probably makes the most appearances on this list. So it's kind of funny. I feel like I'm becoming the Hugh Grant expert as far as, and I haven't even said, we haven't covered Love Actually yet. And I'm pretty sure he's in another one. It's not popping to mind. And Sandra Bullock's been in a couple as well, but this is definitely the two of them together. I mean, I've realized between both of them, just in their individual films, how much they actually elevate all the people around them. And so the fact that these two come together, I mean, it's almost like, even if it wasn't Sandra Bullock in this film, I think Hugh Grant would have made the movie more than it is, and vice versa. If it was just Sandra Bullock and somebody else playing Hugh Grant, I think people would like it just because it's her. I think they're both just that talented. And so the fact that they're together, I think, makes this movie extremely rewatchable and enjoyable, even though I think they both definitely elevate the material.
I agree with that. And I think that they are really in their sweet spot in this movie. They play off each other so well. And I think anybody else probably could have stepped into that, but it seemed like they had so much fun doing it at the same time.
Yeah. I was just thinking, it really feels like they are coming in here, enjoying each other. And I think that always makes for a good rom-com, when you can tell the actors are enjoying each other's presence. But at this point in both of their careers, they both kind of rose in the early 90s. And so they're, at this point in 2002, they're pretty seasoned. And I do feel like it's both of them are just kind of come in and they're like, okay, hold my beer. Just let us show you how it's done.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I kind of threw in a little jab there. Do you think I'm being a little too harsh on I feel like if they weren't in this movie, I still think number 17 is pretty high, in my opinion. But I mean, I think if you took them away from this movie doesn't have a lot of legs to stand on.
I agree with that. I mean, it's a pretty common theme for a movie. You have two people that work in a workplace together that are complete opposites. I mean, there's nothing new to the storyline, I would say, but something about, I would say, Hugh Grant in this, as I watched it and thought about other movies that I've seen him in, it's a pretty common role for him. Now, he got to be funny, but he also was just the charming playboy and went off his looks and went off his intelligence. And I wouldn't say he just dialed it in or called it in, but I don't think that this was Oscar-worthy material. Now, I've seen him in other things since that he was really fantastic in, and saw a whole complete depth and different side to him than I'd ever seen before. And same with Sandra Bullock. But this was just a fun movie, and it was perfect for the time when rom-coms were really at their height and really brought people to the theaters, and people really loved it. And this, I believe, this genre, this time period was really the heyday for romantic comedies, and this fit perfectly in there.
Yeah, no, definitely, for sure. And and I haven't, I'm not the expert on the Hugh Grant canon, but compared to some of the other movies we watched, like Four Weddings and a Funeral and Notting Hill, he's very much the protagonist. And this one's a little bit of a turn where I actually think it's almost a little fascinating, I think, because his stammering and his dialogue and all that is still kind of intact, but he's definitely playing someone who's, quote unquote, the bad guy, even though we know, he's going to turn in some way. But, he's definitely the, evil person. And it's just kind of funny that even 2002, I mean, especially in the 80s with like movies like Wall Street and stuff, there was always a sense of the corporate overlords. But I think we're even more sensitive to it now, especially with like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and those characters. So it's kind of funny watching this movie from 2002, and it's like that like corporate, like rich, I can do anything type of guy is always kind of been there. But it's still, I think we were a little bit more forgiving back then than we are now.
Well, and I think he was such a passive character in that particular realm, because if you look at him and his brother is definitely the villain. He has no conscience,
Yes.
Has zero personality. He and his wife, they're complete straight. I mean, they literally have zero personality, and watching them in comparison where he is the one making the decisions, and Hugh Grant is the face. He is just the charming, can go and talk to anyone, is repeating verbatim what someone has given him or just whatever first comes to mind. And he completely goes off his looks and charm alone without having to have any accountability. And so I feel like he is the villain, but he's more the face of the company, where his brother is the true villain of the story.
Yeah. No, definitely. I still don't know if I quite buy, Sandra Bullock's character, Lucy, taking this job. I think the route that they take to like, I'm going to save the community center is, it's a little kind of, I don't know. I didn't quite buy that she would make this decision, but I don't know. Maybe if you're starving for money that much, you make such decisions.
Well, I thought it was so funny how her parents are so against her taking it, especially her mother. But her father eventually says, it's good to have the bail money because she is such an activist and is in jail so often. So I think at that point, he's looking at the bottom line of this would be great to replenish our fund where we're not having to spend it all on bail money. So it is a stretch, definitely. And again, this is not an Oscar-worthy screenplay, but it's a lot of fun.
You and Tim you didn't meet in the same workplace, did you?
No, we didn't. We actually met at church in the college Sunday school department. And so we're both very different people than we were back then. But even then, he was witty and one of the funniest people I had ever met. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've never met anybody like him. And this is really fun. And even to this day, it's 25 years later that we've been together. We laugh on a daily basis. And there's witty things that are being said in our house. And so I can definitely relate to that in that relationship.
I also kind of laughed at this. I just mentioned kind of the fact that, there's a lovable, CEO type, which you probably wouldn't see in today's films. If you took screenwriters today, they would go with a whole different bent.
Oh, yes. With the whole Me Too movement, this movie would not have even been made. There would have been so many backlashes about it. No, it would not even be possible.
Is there any scenes that you always remember?
I think my favorite is when George is just expressing how much he depends on Lucy's point of view, and she's completely exasperated at this point.
All right, George, you are absolutely right. This has nothing to do with you. This is entirely all my thing because I've managed to turn myself into this. There's not even a name for it.
Well, that's not like I'm enjoying it either, Before you came into my life, I was capable of making all kinds of decisions. Now I can't. I'm addicted. I have to know what you think. What do you think?
George, I think you're the most selfish human being on the planet.
That's just silly. Have you met everyone on the planet?
Things like that scene.
Yeah.
I love that scene. I think it is so funny. I also love when he's talking about her mother, and she is truly terrifying. Her looks, I just hope someday I can completely emulate those when I meet my boys' girlfriends. But he says to Lucy, yes, she is terrifying. I thought she was going to kill me and feed me to the poor. I mean, just little one-liners like that are my absolute favorites from this movie.
Yeah, it almost slips out of his mouth so quickly and softly. He's always kind of have a softer tone with his delivery that they can almost like go over your head a little bit as far as the cleverness of the writing goes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know this is real random. It's not necessarily like one of my favorite scenes, but I had this in a bold type. But when they go to the what kind of party dinner is that? Like, it was a costume ball sort of or whatever like that?
It's like a fundraiser. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Anyway, I thought Sandra Bullock looked wonderful in her dress. I thought that was a good moment of, like, highlighting, just how gorgeous she is. I don't know if you noted that or anything.
Well, they kept her so plain and so
Yes.
straightforward through the whole movie. I mean, even her suits are beige or, I mean, just completely plain. And then to have her have such a contrast, and a lot of it came from that jealousy of June stepping in and the attention that June was getting. It's like she all of a sudden realized that she was a woman and she could step and own that power and own that beauty. And it took George completely off guard because he wasn't used to seeing that side of her either. So yes, she is stunning at that party.
There were two scenes that I remember this always being a favorite of my mom's. Like, I think I bought this DVD for around Christmas, like around this time, I guess 2002 or so. But the two scenes, like, I still always remembered. One was the tennis scene, where she's kind of basically recruited this new girl, June, to replace her. And of course, jealousy ensues. But I love the competitiveness that happens during that scene.
That scene, and then the one following where they have to get off the highway and they have to find the RV. That part absolutely kills me every single time. Just, yes, the look on the woman's face when Lucy Kelson is in the restroom and she's like, "Come on, babies." And, they're all terrified. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, this would never happen in real life. But
Right.
It just is so funny.
Okay, don't panic. We'll be back in the city in 20 minutes.
I don't have 20 seconds. I feel like I swallowed a cruise missile.
Listen, if you want to go, go.
What am I, 5 years old? This is my car.
It's only a Volvo.
Well, people just don't go in Volvos.
I'll buy you another Volvo.
No. Because for the rest of your life, that'll be the only thing you'll ever remember about me. I'll be the woman who went on the front seat.
That would be hard to forget.
And those scenes, I mean, the tennis scene, not so much so, but I mean, everybody has had that moment, even if it wasn't a romantic jealousy or rivalry. Like, you've had that moment where you've played some kind of game or sport and you're like basically rivals across from you and you just completely lose sense of everything else around you and you're only focused on beating that person. And then I think everybody
That may have happened the weekend I met my husband.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah.
do tell.
Well, we met really and spent time during a Disciple Now weekend at a friend's house, and it was mainly Laterno students, which back then the ratio of guys to girls was very high, about 8 or 9 to 1. And my dad was the teacher and he begged me to come that weekend, and Tim happened to be there that weekend. And there was one other girl there who was a little odd, and she kept trying to get Tim's attention. And she's like, "Look, I can put my legs over my head," and would lay on the floor. And I was like, what is happening? So then Tim gives me his jacket while we're playing paintball. And I'm like, yes, I won. I'm going, okay, this is really bad if I'm comparing myself to the girl that's trying to contort herself on the floor. So it just was a very interesting situation.
That's hilarious. I also noted it's just, and maybe, I don't know if it's a scene that people like go to, but basically the scene where Sandra Bullock is attached to her stapler during the going away party.
Oh yes, that was fantastic.
Oh my God. Okay, fine. How much does a stapler run? Here's $10. Here's $10. Ridiculous. Just leave
it's
it.
not your
Just
stapler.
what is the matter with? Give me my stapler.
You
didn't
look,
pay for
that
it with
is-
your
no,
own
no,
money.
no,
Just give me.
It's not
You have
your-
more of these.
Oh my God.
Just give me the stapler.
All you're missing is the mug.
Give it back to
All
me.
right, all right, enough, enough.
Ow!
Leave,
She's hurting me.
Leave. Off. In here.
She owned that
Yeah.
stapler. It should have been hers.
Yeah. And once again, not like probably, I don't think anybody's ever almost gone into a literal fist fight over something, but everybody's been in a working scenario where like there's just somebody who just takes, things just a little too far. Like, if that pen is company property, you're like, come on, it's a pen.
But you know, watching the scene right before that where the office is throwing her a going away party and the guy composes the poem and she immediately comes back with something clever and they're all looking at her with these blank stares. And I thought, they have zero personality. And then I thought, I worked in an office like that. I know these people. So having a personality, they weren't quite sure what to do with me. So I'm really sure they weren't sure what to do with her.
I did want to talk. I found this little fact. I thought it was pretty cool. I'm just going to read it straight through just because it'll come out better that way. But the film was originally set to be shot entirely in Toronto due to cheaper production costs, but producer star Bullock insisted that a film about New York City must be made in New York City. It ended up being shot entirely on location within a 17-week span. The film revitalized the economy of New York City after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, and allowed businesses to flourish once again. In honor of the cast and crew's contribution to the city, December 11th, 2002 was named 2 Weeks Notice Day by the mayor of New York City.
That is so cool.
Yeah, had no idea because you definitely, a lot of these movies are set in different cities, and New York City definitely, pops up in a lot of these films, and definitely, the setting in New York City, and especially him being a big CEO, definitely plays into that. But I thought that was a cool little nugget there.
Well, that makes sense because I know the city struggled so much after that, and I'm a huge Broadway fan, and the theaters down in Times Square and in the Broadway section really struggled to bring in audiences just because of fear and other reasons for traveling. And so to have something like that to revitalize the economy, I'm sure was huge because New York was reeling after that and they needed all the help they could get.
Yep. And the scenes also, I just want to note between the brothers, they were filmed in actually one of Donald Trump's actual houses, and so that's why he makes an appearance in this movie. So
I just figured it was ego, but you never know.
yeah, yeah. So we watched this with Hallie. Hallie just turned 13, and we were watching it. And when he popped up, she was just like, "Wait, what in the world is he doing there?" And I was like, "This is the thing that happened."
And this is even pre-Apprentice days, so I'm sure that he was so excited to be able to have his moment on film.
Yeah, I always remember the Home Alone 2 cameo. That's just, I always remember that, but I had completely forgotten that he makes a little appearance in this movie.
Well, that explains it.
Movie musings.
So this movie opens and closes with Lucy ordering Chinese food on the phone. So I just was wondering, what is your favorite Chinese order?
Oh, wow. I love Mugu Gai Pan. That's one of my favorites. I also love shrimp and lobster sauce. And I could really identify with her ordering multiple things because sometimes I want to eat different things and probably not quite to that excess, but I can completely understand wanting different flavors.
Yes, I know that's always the temptation of, that type of food. It's just like, you want all the taste, and it's almost like, you have to get the one thing, and it's always probably a little too much than you actually need. It's like, if I could have a little taste here and a little taste there.
Anything to keep me from having to cook, I will eat leftovers. So that sounds like a great plan.
There you go. Yeah, I will say, I know it's a romantic comedy. It's not going to win an Oscar, but this scene really bothered me at the beginning and the end. I was like, who are you to like criticize Lucy for like her status in life? Like, this order for one, and I know they like the little button at the end where she's like, no, it's actually for two. But I was just like, the gall of this. No restaurant would ever ask that of the person.
I don't think so. And it almost alluded to the fact she might have an eating disorder. And I thought, okay, there are deleted scenes that we're not aware of. Like, what is happening here? But you also see it like with her chili dogs after the tennis meet, that she definitely is an overeater, emotional overeater. So yeah, there was a lot of very odd inconsistencies in that plot line.
Very much. And I feel like if you've been around food services workers before or restaurant owners, they do not care at all about what basically the story behind this food order. They want they want to get the money and the food out there. If you want like everything on the menu, great. If you don't, let's keep it going. So
Only thing I can think is how many chopsticks she needed, perhaps, and maybe how many fortune cookies if she's feeding more than 2 people. But yeah, none of that made sense.
Yeah. So the second question I have for you is a little bit deeper. But so in this movie, you have Lucy, who is this activist, liberal, just wears her heart on her sleeve. I don't need to make money. And then you have Hugh Grant's character, this corporate CEO, snobby, has had everything handed to him. And so the whole point of this movie is that, these two basically find, a middle point, how we all wish this world could ultimately be. So do you, Sarah, think that people are capable of change?
It's interesting, as I was watching this movie last week for the first time in quite a while. It's always been a favorite, but I don't have it on a streaming service. I actually had the DVD I had to pull out. And as I was watching it, and my husband and I've been married 23 years. We've known each other, 25 years. There's a lot of change that takes place with that. And I thought they are so completely opposite. Their belief system, the way just they view humanity, their families. I kind of wondered as the movie ended, did they actually make it? Did they actually stay together? Because they are so opposite. And I believe that people can change, and I do believe that opposites attract, but their core values do not line up of who they are as people. And so I kind of had a as I finished the movie and thought about it a little bit more, that I don't know if their storyline would continue with that happily ever after. Now, I don't think that she would take it as far as the previous Mrs. Wade's that are alluded to in the film, but I really believe that people can change if they want to change, and that relationships can last even if they are not the same. But this was a bit of a stretch for the long term.
Yeah, no, man, you summed that up very well. Yeah, it's like opposites attract, but when, as you had mentioned it, when it comes to like core values, that's where like it feels like most relationships, those align, even though personality traits may be very different from one another.
And I just don't know if he is capable of the depth that she has. Like she's a flavor for right now and has kept his attention for a little while, but will that ADHD behavior continue, 5-10 years from now? So I just don't know if it's meant to be, but it was for the movie. So there we go.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, exactly. And the other way around, like she is like far too intelligent for him too. I think like she would like
true story.
Yeah, she wouldn't. I think she would want somebody to challenge her. Not I don't think she would like be the type to just carry somebody along through a relationship. But okay, we kind of touched on it a little bit. We talked about that stapler scene, and it just made me think. And you might have a story because you kind of alluded to this, but do you think going away parties are awkward in a workplace?
Yes, generally so. It's pretty unusual if you have great camaraderie between people at parties. Now, I've worked at jobs where there was great camaraderie and we had good parties and it was fun. And sometimes we would even hang out outside the workplace. And then I had others that I thought, I hope I don't see you on the street outside the workplace because I might like accidentally purposely trip you. So it really just depends. But they are so awkward in that whole office and no one had a personality. And I thought, this is awful. And I've worked with attorneys. They're not all like that. Most of them have a great sense of humor. So just how dry they all were, I thought was quite humorous. And it made me realize that Alicia Witt, that plays June, starting with that movie, I could not stand her in anything else. I mean, she was such a great character actress. And even I've seen her in different movies. I've seen her in Hallmark movies, and every single time I'm like, I'm just not a huge fan. And I think it stemmed from her performance in this because she is so obviously there to be a gold digger and to get into that position. It was such a transparent role and so shallow that I think you could see it coming from 1,000 miles away.
Yeah, no, I think she's really good in the limited time she has in this movie for sure. She plays that foil really really well. Yeah, I just kind of laughed. I've always kind of almost traditionally, if I've left somewhere before, I it's basically you have the like going away lunch or party, and then you have the second one with like a more kind of closer group, and that always seems to be the quote unquote real going away party.
Absolutely. I think I even skipped out on mine for one place because I thought, I'm good. I don't need to say goodbye to anybody else. You guys have a great time.
They're like, "Where's Sarah?
Yeah.
What happened to her?"
She's gone.
Yeah, yeah.
Rom-com rankings.
We kind of talked about this like this first category a little bit, which is the romantic chemistry between the leads. And so one heart being the lowest, 5 hearts being the highest. I'm interested in what you give this here because I think we both agree that Bullock and Grant are great together. Their characters, on the other hand, we don't know how well they would fare after the end credits roll on this. So what ranking would you give this category?
I would actually give it a 4 because the final scene where he comes and is so heartfelt to her in his speech at the community center and recites that back to her when she's working at legal aid really showed a tender moment that we had not seen any other time in the movie. And her first reaction is to be critical of his speech and the elements, grammatically that she was not a fan of, but then she was able to flip that as well and realize that she could articulate her feelings and not be seen as weak, I think, in that instance. And so I would say at that moment, and it's probably one of the best rom-com kisses I've seen at the end, like they were all about it. So I thought that really kind of changed the perception for me.
Okay. I gave it a solid 3. Just kind of like I mentioned, there's just the character element here that I just really get hung up on. But as the actors themselves, I really like what they have going on, and I would love to see them do another movie like this. Even now. So I know there's not really a big market for older adult rom-coms, but I would really like to see them, even if it wasn't a romantic comedy. I feel like there's something there. There's that pitter patter there that you kind of talked about that I think is really good. And instead they both just kind of made more movies in this genre, not so much ones together. But so this category, the second one I usually have is it's the best friend component of this movie. And I'll be blunt here because we watched this a couple months ago. I was kind of struggling to think of who was the best friend in this movie, and so I think it was Heather Burns who plays Meryl Brooks. Is that right?
I think that's right. Yeah, and then George has the limo driver that is basically fills that role of a best friend for him because he is so insulated from the rest of the world. That's really the only contact that he has that's consistent.
Yeah, and I think an argument can be made that Lucy's parents could kind of fill that role a little bit. You kind of talked a little bit about her dad and how he kind of warms up to the idea of her working for him. So how do you rate this one?
They weren't strong characters and they really were so minimal in the movie. Now, what I thought was very interesting, so on the DVD that I have, they actually had deleted scenes, and the only deleted scene that was on there was one of their wedding. And it was so interesting to watch because it had a completely different perspective. It shows George's brother and his wife coming, and they actually invite them to something, and they're touched that they're like, we've been invited. So it threw a completely different viewpoint on everyone, with the best friend there, with her mom and dad. They had the wedding at the community center. It was just a very interesting scene, and it made me curious why they didn't include it, because it really I felt like it wrapped up the story a whole lot better than the way that the original movie ended. And I'd be curious if you can see it anywhere else, because it really, I'd never watched it before. Granted, the movie's been out over 20 years. I don't know why I never watched the scene, but I thought it really helped give a better perspective of everyone in that and gave them more character and more depth. But just generally, the best friends, this was not a strong best friend movie. So I'd say maybe 1.5 hearts, not a lot.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And I'm going to come back to what you just said. Well, two things. One, man, kudos. I mean, you were doing some deep research for this. That's awesome. So, because I didn't watch that deleted scene. I want to come back to that because that's really interesting. Because I think I would actually probably like this movie a little bit better, knowing that the ending existed. So we'll come back to that. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to the soundtrack, which is the third category. So I will say the traditional soundtrack. I think if you at the time, if you went into Best Buy or wherever to buy the CD, it would be in just the score. And the score was by John Powell. But now that Spotify and such things exist, people have like compiled the playlist of the songs that were from this movie. So I didn't know if you picked up on either of those while watching this movie, or if you actually sought the soundtrack out.
So when I saw that soundtrack was one of these categories, and at first I thought, soundtrack, like, did this even have a soundtrack? Like, I did not remember songs as vividly as I did like from Notting Hill or from Runaway Bride or Sleepless in Seattle, that had fantastic soundtracks associated with it. And then as I started looking through the songs that were on, I thought, oh yeah, like it did have some songs I just completely forgot because they weren't such a huge part of the storyline. They were definitely more filler or background than it did to promote the storyline. And like I said, I'm a huge musical person. And so especially if it sets up the story or it really is moving the story forward, I'll latch on to that more. That was not necessarily the case for this movie. It had a very eclectic soundtrack as I looked through the songs. And so not that they were bad, they just were very different. So I'd say maybe 2.5, 3. It was fine. I didn't feel like it was essential for the storytelling of the movie.
Gotcha. Yeah, you're framing all this so well, because my rating's a little higher. The way you've said that, I'm like, yeah, she's kind of right. I probably have this too high. But I did listen to the soundtrack for the past couple of days, and the score is actually a very nice score. Like some romantic comedies around this time, they were like very, I kind of always jokingly say they remind me of like a Full House or something like that, like very like Q-ish type of things, like if somebody falls, you hear a boing or something like that in the music. But this but this score is actually very pleasant, and I would say very soothing. And if you're one to listen to scores, as far as like if you're ever writing or doing work or whatever like that, it's a very calming soundtrack. So I liked it a little bit more than I thought. And then the songs that I've always been a big Counting Crows fan, so Big Yellow Taxi is like just very nostalgic for me. And I mean, you even have an appearance by Norah Jones in here, and she plays the song "The Nearness of You." And so, I mean, how early aughts is that, Yeah, I gave it 3.5, but it just made me laugh. I was like, I don't know if this was the case for you, but it just reminded me, like, there was definitely a moment like Norah Jones, if you were like having anything nice, like any kind of party, or you made dinner, or maybe it's a romantic dinner, like Norah Jones was your go-to artist to play in the background.
Sure.
Sure. You may be like, I hate Norah Jones, I don't like her at all, but
no, she's fine. I just that I could see that, and I remember her being in the background and having that song, but that whole scene, I wouldn't have known necessarily it was her, just because there were so many other things I was focusing on in the scene.
Yeah, I think her music in that scene actually kind of elevates the romantic part of it, and we talked about Bullock in her dress and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I feel like Norah Jones, I might be making this up, but I feel like I remember she's like has a jazz background or something like that. Or something like that, or she's and so then she had this like surge of a career, and I think I'm sure people who like were pure like jazz lovers hated it because everybody's like, yeah, I like jazz. I listen to Nora Jones, and I'm sure they're like, that is not jazz, but anyway.
Probably not.
Yeah. So you touched on it a little bit. The chase scene kind of declaration of love. So there's definitely a moment here where George deserts, this press conference of the community center about to be torn down and races to it's kind of like a pro bono law firm, right? That Lucy's at. So what do you give this? You seem to like it. You mentioned the kiss part of it. That didn't register for me at all.
It's a really interesting scene because Lucy is all business. And so for George to show up at her workplace in front of all of her coworkers and declare his love in the best way that he can, in a quiet, contemplative way, which is a complete departure from the rest of the movie and his character. I feel like at first she doesn't know how to process those emotions. And you see that wall go up because she's been hurt and she's scared. But then her coworkers have the same deadpan expression as they're all processing it together, which I thought was really humorous. But then all of a sudden she realizes, oh, yeah, okay, this is great. And so it was just, I liked it, but it was a very odd culmination of the relationship because everything had been so quick-witted. The banter back and forth was just constant. And this was something completely different. And so I did like it, but it was just so different from the rest of the movie. And then when she chases after him, they have this amazing kiss that goes on. And I thought, wow, like he really went for it. And I don't think I noticed that 20 plus years ago when I first saw it. So I did enjoy that part. So I would say probably a 4.
Okay. So this is where I'm a little, and this ties into kind of what you were talking about earlier. I'm a little harsh on it. The thing that really bothered me about this movie was the community center aspect of the story, because I feel like it was just used as, it definitely was used as the catalyst for every action that happens in this movie. And I feel like, we talked about New York City being character. I really felt like this movie missed its chance to really build up that community center aspect. We never meet anybody from the community center. We never see inside the community center. They talk about it being this like historical building. And so it really bothered me that he just like ditches this press conference and I could just audibly hear his brother going like, okay, and hitting like the button that makes the wrecking ball come down. Like I almost heard the community center crashing. It's like, I understand that you, George, see this as a big declaration, that like I love you and things will be great. But he's just like, you're doing no good leaving your job, dude. Like you just like that doesn't mean the community center is not going to go down. Now going back to what you said, the fact that this deleted scene and they get married at the community center?
They get married at the community center, and the man that performs the ceremony apparently is the one that's the head of the community center. So it's really interesting. You've got to go watch it. It's very intriguing.
Yeah. Is the scene outside of the community center or inside?
Of course. Yes, it's not inside.
Okay. Yeah. But anyway, so that's why I gave it 2.5. I just mentally I love rom-coms. I totally can like escape into this movie, but like it was just one of those things where I'm like, Lucy's like, I appreciate the effort, guy, but that didn't save my building. But it seemed like I really do think this movie would have been enhanced by that scene, even though I haven't seen it. I really think that would have helped me personally, but yeah.
And you may watch it and go, Sarah is smoking something because it's literally added nothing to the movie. But I personally found it enjoyable.
Yeah, that's funny. Okay, so the last one, category is the rewatchability. What do you give this?
Absolutely. I think it's a lot of fun. I think sometimes you have to watch it multiple times to catch all of the little one-liners and to pick up on the little nuances that are in the movie. And there are things that I saw this time watching it that I had no recollection of from the many times I've watched it before. So I would say a 4 as far as rewatchability.
Okay. Yeah. I give it a solid 3.5. I do think this is enjoyable. You mentioned, the other movies that came out around this time, I do think it definitely gets lost amongst the shuffle of rom-coms. to me, like I mentioned, number 17 on this list, like I'm just looking at a couple that are above it, but like Say Anything, I mean, I would put Say Anything before this. I mean, there's a lot of movies I just go to. 2 weeks notice isn't necessarily one of them. I don't think it's had quite the legs as maybe some others have, but I just can't help but think that whoever compiled this list, the different writers, and they must have just had like a real sweet spot for this movie. So, because I totally like, if it is like a favorite of yours, there's nothing inherently like awful about the movie, but yeah, definitely without the stars, it definitely would not be as good.
And it's funny as I look through the different rom-coms that are some of my favorites, I do find it interesting that this is number 17. And I don't know if you saw the movie Music and Lyrics with he and Drew Barrymore in it. And it had some of the same quick-witted one-liners. I love that. And that's probably a good almost decade later that movie came out. But, and he plays the same character in that as well, just kind of flippant boy toy, really doesn't emotionally invest in anything. But I look at that and go, that had almost better writing than this did. And I don't even know if it's on that list, but I think it's very interesting how far movies have come. I really don't think it could have been written now and received well at all, but it was fun when it came out.
Yeah. And I failed to mention the director here, Marc Lawrence. He's done a lot of projects with both Hugh Grant and Sandra Bullock. So 4 of his movies, this one, then Music and Lyrics, which you mentioned. Did you hear about the Morgans? And the Rewrite, all-star Hugh Grant. And so I think there's a relationship there. And he also, he didn't direct these films, but he wrote the comedy films Forces of Nature, Miss Congeniality, and the sequel to that movie as well. So anyway, it's funny that he's worked with these these two quite a bit, and so there's definitely a history there. So it makes sense that he's kind of able to write for them so well.
Absolutely, because I feel like he finds their strengths very, very well in all of those movies.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to get in about this movie?
I don't think so. I think it's a lot of fun. I think everybody should see it at least once. And if it's not your favorite, that's okay, because you'll at least get some laughs out of it and then move on.
Yeah, exactly.
Recommendations.
Is there anything you would like to recommend?
We recently watched Silo on Apple TV, which is a complete departure from this. It was a struggle to make it through, but after watching the season 1 finale, I have thought about that more than I did the rest of the show. I mean, my husband literally would fall asleep within 15 minutes, and he usually was fine. So it was a very interesting show to me. The other favorite we have right now is Only Murders in the Building. And I absolutely adore Steve Martin and Martin Short. And this season, with it focusing around Broadway, again, my sweet spot. I absolutely love it. There are things I've learned, terms that I didn't even know were terms, and I'm like, oh, I had no idea. So it's been educational for me, but that's another one of my favorites.
Okay, yeah, awesome. We just haven't started the 3rd season yet for whatever reason. And we definitely watched the first 2. Only Murders in the Building for me is I love Steve Martin so much and Martin Short, and so I watch it almost solely for them. So even though I might not like, I don't think it's a bad show, but it's not the one I'm immediately like, all right, let's watch it. Let's watch it. But just see there's always like a couple of scenes with those two that I think their delivery and the writing is so sharp at moments. It makes it worth watching for me.
They are fantastic. I remember seeing an interview with the two of them, and the first time that Martin Short met Steve Martin, they were working on Three Amigos, and Martin Short had come to his home, and he looked around and saw all these expensive paintings and just how elaborate his home was. And he said, I've seen your work. How can you afford all of this? And so just the banter, the quick-wittedness between the two of them. I mean, they have been friends for such a long time, and there's such a deep respect, but also such comedic timing between the two of them. I love that they're in this show together and kind of having a heyday again. I feel like they both equally deserve that, because they are hysterical, and they were part of that original group from Saturday Night Live. At least Steve Martin was, and then Martin Short came in a little bit later, back when it was really truly funny, at the very beginning. So I really, really enjoyed them in this show.
Yeah. You saying that, I might have mentioned it before, but I always tell people about this, but this is the bad thing kind of about streaming, and especially Netflix. Like, they push out so much content. Sometimes things like come out and then they're forgotten about. But Steve Martin and Martin Short went on the road, and they basically, it's not a one act show, because there's obviously two of them on Netflix. It came out in 2018. It's called Steve Martin and Martin Short, An Evening You Will Forget for the Rest of sorry, this is a funny title. An Evening You Will Forget for the Rest of Your Life. But anyway, have you seen that?
I have not. I remember following Steve Martin on Twitter about the time that came out. I really wanted to get tickets to take my parents, and the dates just could never line up where we could go. But if you don't follow Steve Martin on Twitter, you should, because he is hilarious.
Yeah. So definitely check that out, especially if you love them. And it's just, they do songs, they do, it's almost like old school comedy, traditional type of stuff, but it's hilarious. And it's one of those things, it's like, especially if you're a fan of them, like, and you have Netflix, like, check it out, it's on there. But so my recommendation, I've been kind of waiting to recommend this one just because it just took me a little bit to finish, not because of the quality of the show, but I've kind of, through this discussion, I feel like you have a dark humor than I think I remember you having. So I really appreciate that about you. I don't know if I'm off by saying that, but there's a show on Netflix called Beef.
Not at all.
I will say it's I really like it a lot. It's one of those that I could understand if people might not like it as much, but basically the premise is two strangers get into a road rage incident that brings chaos into their lives. So it's 10 episodes. It's the first TV show that A24 has produced. And a lot of people are a fan of A24 films. So it is definitely a drama. It's got some comedy elements to it. It's definitely the way that these two characters, how this road rage incident just like catapults their thinking. And I think it's I think if people give it a chance, I think it really shows just how we let like anger consume our lives. And it shows how much like basically being reactionary has effect on all the people around you. And then being A24 with a kind of an indie spirit, the ending gets very just like bizarre, but in a like wonderful way. So I think if you're open to like kind of some TV shows that'll make you kind of be a little bit more introspective, like I think people definitely need to check out Beef on Netflix. So I think it was nominated for a couple of Emmys, which because of the writer's strike, that ceremony was postponed. But I think it got some love by the performances there and stuff. So that's my recommendation.
I will definitely have to check that out.
But if you watch it and you're kind of like, oh my gosh, this is the darkest thing I've ever watched, and, just don't blame me. So yeah,
no worries.
Yeah. Well, as always, check out moviesarelife.com for episode reviews and more. If you love this podcast, please take a moment to rate and review it. This really helps us with finding new listeners. And then, Sarah, did you know that you can support us financially?
I did not know that.
Yeah, so it's super easy. There's a link in the podcast description. You just can click it. It says support this podcast. And so that really helps us just keep the lights on, so to speak. But we really appreciate any kind of donation or support. And that just kind of helps things like the website and the recordings and the storage and, renting. I had to rent this movie on Apple. I was like, how is this not streaming anywhere? But we would always really appreciate that. And I want to thank you, Sarah, for coming on. And this was fun to catch up. I mean, I didn't think 2 weeks notice would deserve almost an hour-long conversation about it, but I think we mined some good stuff from it.
I think so too. It was great to catch up.
Well, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great week.
Thanks, you too. Take care.
Okay. All right, bye.
Bye-bye.